Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Board on a Thursday. My name is Chris Burden. I'm going to be bringing you my first of fantasy football coverage today, specifically quarterbacks. We'll be talking about which quarterbacks I'm high on, low on, and I got my guest here today with me, Justin Burden.
Hey, what's up?
So we're going to be talking quarterbacks and where we see them going, what our strategies are for quarterbacks, and just kind of give you some analysis. We're not going to have weird metrics that no one's ever heard of. We just kind of go off our gut and what we've, seen happen before. So first off, Justin, kind of what's your strategy going forward about quarterbacks?
Well, I usually draft quarterbacks really late
every
year. But it really depends on the situation during the draft. Obviously, like if somebody falls, if I have like the 11th pick or something and number one quarterback somehow falls to me, obviously that. But my rule of thumb is usually I like to wait on a quarterback.
Well, and what you said is, a lot of people say, well, if Aaron Rodgers is still there in the third, I got news for you. In 99% of leagues, he's not going to be there in the third round. Like, most of the time we're in leagues with our friends. We're in leagues with people that, don't follow football, fantasy football 100% all the time. So they think Aaron Rodgers at the end of the first round is a good pick.
Yeah.
And so those guys aren't going to fall to you in the third round. So to me, I'm like you, I always like to wait, and we'll get into why I think that's a winning strategy instead of going for one of those high-end quarterbacks early on. But let's start off by talking about or specifically my rankings. And Justin, you can just chime in with some differences of opinion or if you like those picks or not. So my top three I think are pretty safe. I think most people would have these as their top three. I've got Aaron Rodgers number 1, Tom Brady 2, followed by Drew Brees. So I kind of see them as being in their own tier. Any one of these guys you draft, you don't have to worry about them for the rest of the year. They're as solid and as consistent as you can ask for. Justin, do you have any issues with those top three?
Not early in the season, but what does worry me a little bit is Drew Brees, number 3. And, I mean, look, Tom Brady, we've been talking about it for a while. Like, Tom Brady eventually, the age has got to come up eventually. You know what I mean? So, to me, those two guys, yeah, I mean, those are smart picks if you take them early. But they do come with a little bit of risk, in my opinion, because eventually – like, that's going to come up, and you just never know what year it's going to be. I mean, but you can't really draft like that. But I'm just saying that would concern me a little bit with taking those guys early. But in terms of quarterback rankings, yeah, I think those are the surefire top 3.
I just think this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. If you draft Tom Brady early, like the year that he went down first game of the season, that pretty much ruined your season. Because what will happen is you wait on a backup because you say, I got Tom Brady, why do I need a backup? Well, then by the time you get a backup, you end up with someone who's now going to be your starter who is complete trash. Now, if I go down the line and I draft maybe a Phillip Rivers or somebody like that, then I'm more inclined to take a backup earlier because my room for error with Phillip Rivers is greater. So I think, hey, I've got to kind of hedge my bet a little bit, get someone else that I like, and I think that an injury at your quarterback position, if you take Rodgers, Brady, or Brees super early, could decimate your entire team.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, quarterbacks are, in my opinion, the easiest thing to draft on draft day because literally you can get down to number 19 and you're still going to get a guy that's a few weeks going to put up some big numbers for you. And in my opinion, they have the least risk of injury too. I mean, yeah, like that. Quarterback's the team leader. He's the guy who takes all the snaps. I get that. But like you said, you can, even if you got a backup who's like a rookie or something, there's a couple of games that he's going to be able to put up some big points just the way the league's set up.
Right. And we'll talk about later kind of the differences of some of these quarterbacks and then the guys you can get really late, maybe even pick up off the free agency wire depending on your league. So after Rodgers, Brady, and Brees, I've got the next tier. I've got Andrew Luck at 4, Matt Ryan at 5, and then Kirk Cousins at 6. I had Matt Ryan last year, and he completely tore it up, put my team in the playoffs pretty much. I had him and Julio Jones. So he was a steal for me because I ended up getting him really late. I think this year people are going to see what he did last year, and they might be a little disappointed at the end of the year.
I like Matt Ryan this year.
I like him too. I just don't think he's going to repeat.
I like him ahead of Andrew Luck personally. And I tell you who else I like in front of Andrew Luck, Cam Newton this year. The reason I like Cam Newton this year, again, let me rephrase. Not that I like him on, like, if I was to do a rankings or my rankings, do I have Cam Newton ahead of Andrew Luck? No, Andrew Luck's the safer pick. What I'm getting at is Cam Newton's a guy to me who's going to have a huge bounce back year, I think. And I think his upside is so high that he's a guy that you could get later on that people are maybe undervaluing. I'll put it this way. At the end of the year, Cam Newton might be the guy who's on the most championship teams.
Right.
So I think that's an important thing to look at when you get into the middle tier of the top 10.
I think what you're saying is the value that Cam Newton's going to give you compared to Andrew Luck, and I agree, is much higher. If it's me and I can't get one of these top three, first of all, I'm going to wait on a quarterback.
Well, let me ask you real quick. When you're doing these rankings, because when I make my rankings, I don't necessarily go on who I think the best person is on day one. I like to put it as like, who do I want to take on draft day? Who do I think is going to have the big year? Do you think that's a mistake for people to make? If they have their top 10 of quarterbacks, do they need to make it who the top 10 safest picks are, or do they need to make their own top 10 of who they really believe is going to make a difference for their team in the upcoming year?
I think it's kind of a mix, and when we go down this list a little bit longer, I think after these 6 guys, there's a gap. So that this guy I have at number 7 and the guy that I have at 18, the difference between those guys is almost nothing. Mm-hmm. By the end of the year. So Matt Stafford, who finished the season last year number 7 in points for quarterbacks, he outscored Phillip Rivers, who finished 14th, by only 21 points the entire year. So that's a little bit more than a point a game. So that's what I'm talking about is you don't have to reach for these quarterbacks where the gap in your points aren't going to be that much. Now, going back to what you asked earlier, do I take into account the safest bets? Yes and no. Like I'll put it this way: if I was going to draft a guy like Marcus Mariota, who I have in the top 10, I'm going to get someone behind him. I'm going to get a reliable backup quarterback, maybe a Eli Manning or someone like that I can maybe even like a Joe Flacco or Andy Dalton, just someone that if he goes down, I'm not doomed. But I wouldn't get 2 guys like Tyrod Taylor and Mariota. I wouldn't get both of those because they're both probably more prone to injury.
Yeah. Well, who's 6 through 10 on yours?
So Kirk Cousins was 6. After him, I've got Russell Wilson, followed by Mariota, Phillip Rivers, and then Dak Prescott.
Well, what I like about 7 and 8 there is me personally, and this is why Aaron Rodgers will always be number 1 as long as he's healthy for me for the next few years. Anytime they can add value on their legs, and that's why I'm big on Cam. I mean, he's not in my top 5, but I'm so big on guys who can, if they're having a terrible throwing game, they can win it for you on their legs. Like they can get you 15 points with rushing.
Right.
So I like having guys like that in the top 10, especially seeing Dak crack your top 10. I think that people that have not only an established running game with them, but guys who can make plays when everything else breaks down is big just for me. I love drafting guys like that.
No, and I agree. And I think a lot of people, Marcus Mariota, I think you had Mariota in our league last year, didn't you?
Yeah.
So from weeks 5 through 12, he was the number 1 fantasy quarterback out there. He outscored Aaron Rodgers during that span. And he fell off at the end. I mean, during the playoffs, he had terrible weeks, and that kind of brought his value down. Mm-hmm. But I think he's a guy, you talked about Cam Newton earlier. I think if Mariota falls to you, he's another guy I think could win you your league. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a guy that could there's not many quarterbacks that can get you 25, 30-point games every week, and he's a guy that could do it. So that's why I'm really high on Mariota. I've always liked Phillip Rivers. I think last year, everything in the world went wrong for him. He still finished 14th, which is middle of the pack. And I think he's going to have a much better year this year with all of his weapons healthy. They added Mike Williams in the draft. I think he's going to give them another option to throw to. So,
well, what do you think about, I think the guy who's like the most question mark on your top 10 for me, and I know he's barely top 10, but Dak Prescott to me, because I feel like he's kind of a system quarterback right now. Like he's got a great running game. He's got a great offensive line. I'd love to see those touchdown numbers go up. I'd love to see more rushing, but I just don't see. I don't know. I just worry about him with and again, I'm just always like this because I've lost so many quarterbacks to injury. But I worry a little bit about his durability throughout the year. If he, even though he's got the great line, if he starts getting out of the pocket a little bit more this year, what do you think? How do you think? Even though he's in your top 10, do you think he's a guy who could kind of disappoint this year a little bit?
I agree that he could disappoint. I don't think he's going to go 23 touchdowns, 4 picks again this year. I don't think he's going to be that efficient. I think he's going to have some growing pains this year. I think Dallas as a team is going to be a little bit down than they were last year just because their defense is awful. Now, they might be behind in more games, so he has to throw more, so that might up his value. But, we talked about adding points through the running game. Him and Tyrod Taylor had the most rushing touchdowns last season with 6. So he's able to find the end zone on goal lines. They work him in a little bit here and there. He's able to run it in a few times. So I think his turnovers are going to go up. So that's why I'm a little bit lower on him. But I think he's a pretty safe pick. I mean, he's in a good offense. He's on a team that should be in the playoff hunt. And he has a running game to kind of lean on, and he's also got one of the best running offensive lines in the league.
Well, let me tell you who I would take. Dak's not in my top 10.
Okay.
I think he's going to have a sophomore slump year. I think that Dallas. I still think Dallas could make the playoffs, obviously, but I think that they're even going to more rely on the running game even more so than they did last year, like a 1-2 punch, even more this year. The guy I would have in my top 10 that I noticed you didn't have is David Carr. Huge on David Carr this year. I think the Raiders team. I'm high on I'm high on almost every offensive Oakland Raider player going into this year because I think that they're going to play. You know how players almost play like in contract years. I feel like their entire team's like on a contract year with 1 year left in Oakland, and so I'm just really big on Oakland. Now Oakland won a lot of close games last year, which could be different, but I don't think anything's going to change with how they play. I mean, they're going to play like. I think that they're going to play the same type of way, and I think they've grown a lot more comfortable within the offense. I'm just really big on David Carr, so I'd have him in my top 10.
My thing with David Carr is he has to play 3 really good defenses twice a year. San Diego's defense really improved last year, and then you got Denver and Kansas City, 2 of the top, I'd say 5 defenses in football.
And excuse me, we said David Carr, obviously Derek Carr, but we messed up a little bit there.
Yes, sorry. Derek Carr.
I'm still having flashbacks of...
Yeah, and I actually wrote David Carr on my thing, so that's my fault. So let's skip ahead and talk 11 through 20 now. So let's... in that same tier that I've got those other guys, I've got Ben Roethlisberger and Eli Manning, 11 and 12. I think Eli Manning could be the sleeper of the year. They added Brandon Marshall. That's a huge step up from the receiving core. Problem with Eli is always his turnovers. They throw it a ton, but he sometimes decides to throw it to the other team. So if he can cut down on those numbers, then he's going to... A couple years ago, he had a bounce-back year where he torched everyone, and I think he finished in like the top 5. So I could see that happening again this year. And Ben Roethlisberger, he's kind of a guy I'm low on just because he's just been so injured, and he's so inconsistent with his home numbers, and his away numbers are just so... polar opposites that it's hard to ignore.
I'm way down on Big Ben. I'm high on Eli this year because when you look at it, the one thing Eli, when he's had great seasons, has had is that big physical wide receiver, a guy who can stretch the field. A guy, he's got the guy who can stretch the field with Odell Beckham, arguably the best receiver in football. But he's got Brandon Marshall now. I said arguably. I know Julio's a beast, but the guy who can get you that first down. I think that's what they didn't have last year. I think that's what forces him to throw the ball deep downfield, forces the ball deep down middle. So I'm with you on Eli. I think Eli's going to actually have a huge year this year. He'd be my top 10 as well.
Well, and I also like their running situation this year. I like Paul Perkins running the ball for them ahead of Rashad Jennings. I just think that's a better fit, and I think they're going to get a lot more yardage out of their ground game, so that's going to help him in the long run too. So 13 through 17 is my next tier.
And I disagree with a lot of this. I'm looking at it.
And I know you do. So number 13, I got Blake Bortles. 14, Cam Newton. 15, Tyrod Taylor. 16, Derek Carr. And 17, Matt Stafford. So where on that list, and if it's multiple, just...
no offense to Blake Bortles, but get him out of there.
See,
I'm just not big on Blake Bortles, man. And I tell you, I'm huge on is Jameis Winston. Okay, Jameis Winston to me is a guy. Again. Here's the thing. I want to put this out there. I like to do my rankings. I like to draft based on who I think, and sometimes it costs me, okay? Because I have a mindset of like, hey, I think this guy's gonna have a big year. Sometimes I might even reach for him, but I'm just going based on the value of do I think this guy's gonna have a better year, and I think Jameis Winston's gonna have a better year than a lot of those guys that you just mentioned on 13 through 17. I think that he's a guy who's yet to kind of grow into the player he's going to be. He's really got to get those turnovers down big time. But I think that he is a guy that if he stays healthy throughout the whole year, he could have a really big year. I'm just big on guys who have huge arms and can push the ball downfield.
See, and I know a lot of people were they probably drafted Blake Bortles early last year because he had a big year 2 years ago. But the guy still finished in the top 10.
But that was all fourth quarter.
I don't care.
A lot of that was all down 3 touchdowns thrown in there. I think that I just don't like to draft guys like that.
Okay, but that's 2 years in a row that he's a top 10 quarterback. 2 years ago, I think he was top 5, top 6. I think you'd be surprised to know that he more than doubled Jameis Winston's rushing numbers and had more rushing touchdowns. See, people don't think about Blake Bortles as a runner, but he had more rushing yards than Andrew Luck. He had 10 less than Aaron Rodgers. He had more than Russell Wilson. And him and Cam Newton had the exact same. So he runs a lot for them. And like we talked about earlier, he's going to get close to 4,000 yards passing. If he can add another 300 yards rushing, which he's done, he did it last year and the year before. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure he got close to it. Then that's added value right there. He throws some turnovers. Yeah, like you said, he got a lot of those points late. But like I've heard Matthew Berry say a lot of times, there's no such thing in fantasy as garbage points. They all count the same.
What about Leonard Fournette? What about I just feel like, don't you think that he's going to be less likely to put up those numbers considering that they're really going to probably try to get this running game established? Now, again, they're going to be behind. That's not going to change. But I just think that eventually you have to look at who's quarterback and which team. So it's tough for me, man. And again, we're talking about like late picks, all right? So we're basically talking about if you're going to take this guy late as your starter. Obviously, if you're going to get this guy as a backup, and around this time, you can still probably, if you want to get one early, I don't know why you would, but you can get this guy as a backup to somebody, maybe a Roethlisberger you took. Maybe you want to take those two guys. So it's all about the way you want to strategize. But I wouldn't feel comfortable going into, even though I like to wait on quarterbacks, if Blake Bortles was my starting quarterback at the end of draft day, I wouldn't be too happy with that.
Okay, but what if you could pair Blake Bortles with Matthew Stafford? And those were your two quarterbacks.
But then I have to but because I'm not huge on Bortles, I have to take Matthew Stafford relatively close to each other when I could be filling up other needs.
See, I just think that a lot of people get caught up. Your entire team, the fact that you've been able to wait, you should have been able to fill up your running back slots. Your
so
team
you're taking
should be
Blake
pretty much
Bortles
filled
over Cam Newton?
Yes.
This year.
Yeah, how did Cam Newton do last year?
But that was last year though. This is
I think Cam Newton is a mental midget. I think that he has from junior college to college, and then when he came in the league, kind of lit the world on fire. He has some adversity after the Super Bowl, and I don't think he's going to be the same player. Now, he might, like you talked about, he might come in and be the guy that turns around and puts your team in the title game this year just because of the upside. But he's a risk pick for me. Now, he could end up completely proving me wrong, but he's a sleeper. So like I said, these guys right here, this is just preference. Any of these guys could be interchanged. I'd say from like 9 to 17, 18, all of these guys could be anywhere on this list. It just really is going to depend on who you like, who you favor.
Well, and that's what you got to think about on draft day is my point. Like, my point is when you're making your rankings at home, you're listening to all these podcasts, you're watching Matthew Berry, you're watching ESPN, you're watching Fox Sports. When you're watching all of these things, you need to, once you get past the top, in my opinion, once you get past like the top 7 or 8, you really need to just look at, okay, if you're going to wait on a quarterback, who's got the most upside? Like if I'm going to wait on a quarterback, and that's my strategy going into draft day, I am 100% going to encourage people to look at who is going to give me the most upside. Because like you said, if you're drafting a quarterback this late anyway, you're probably going to turn around a couple of rounds later and get another one. So you can take a little risk on there. So I'm going to look at, out of those people on your 11 through 18, 11 through 17, which one of those quarterbacks gives me the biggest chance to have a huge year. And so that's what I look at when I'm looking at this low when I'm drafting late. Now, if you draft early, you're not having to worry about this. These people are going to be your backups. But in my opinion, a guy like Cam Newton, who's proven to be like an MVP, a guy like that who's had one down year, I'm going to put my money on a Cam Newton before I'd put it on maybe a Tyrod Taylor. I'm also going to put my money on a Derek Carr because he's got that upside. Like, we haven't seen the best of Derek Carr. Again, I know you feel that way about Blake Bortles, still a very young quarterback. The only thing that concerns me is Blake Bortles plays on a terrible team.
You don't think Marshawn Lynch is going to tear into Derek Carr's numbers?
Honestly, I don't. I'm not worried about that at all. I think Derek Carr, I think people need to really be looking at Derek Carr this year.
And here's
Big
another
time.
thing. See, you're on Derek Carr. I don't know why.
I'm big on Derek Carr.
Only because he signed that huge contract, and you think that for some reason he's going to light the world on fire. But if I had to choose between Blake Bortles and Derek Carr, I look at Blake Bortles' schedule. He gets to play Houston twice, which is they got a tough defense, but he gets to play the Colts twice, and he gets to play Tennessee twice. That's a lot different than playing San Diego twice, Denver, and Kansas City twice. So to me, when you got these guys that are close, you're gonna decide what's the determining factor in who you pick. To me, schedule is a determining factor. Now, you don't know whose defenses are going to be more improved than the year before. But, again, you're just kind of picking based on, and you said it earlier, kind of what your preferences are, kind of what you look for in a quarterback, what you're kind of looking to get out of your guy. Me, personally, I would rather have a consistent guy that's going to get you points. That's why Matthew Stafford, even though I have him at 17, if it really came down to it, I would probably take him ahead of, like, Tyrod Taylor and probably maybe even Blake Bortles, just because I feel like he's going to be throwing the ball 50 times a game. So after Stafford, I have Winston, followed by Joe Flacco at 19, and then Carson Palmer at 20. And again, these guys could interchange just depending on what you're looking for. Jameis Winston, I know a lot of people are going to be high on him. He's in a conference or in a division where, with New Orleans, where they're going to be throwing the ball around a lot. So he's going to have some big games, but again, he does turn the ball over a lot, and he doesn't get you the rushing yards that you would think he would get you because he ran in college. So out of those three, are there any that you think I'm too high on?
Honestly, when it gets this low in the quarterback ratings, you're looking for backups. So once again, with a backup fantasy quarterback, I'm looking at somebody who's has the best chance of staying healthy, because if you're drafting a backup for insurance. So if you say you take a Russell Wilson as your starter, a guy who's going to be running a lot, a guy who's had injury history, you need to get you a Joe Flacco. You need to get you somebody who's going to be pretty consistently, who's played a lot of games, who's going to get you that on a bye week, get you that 12 points. I know that seems low, but that for a backup, that's not bad. So again, when you get to this low of numbers, you've mentioned it earlier, the rankings really don't matter. I mean, the difference between these guys are so little. I would just go you need to make sure that I'd say by Jameis Winston on your list, by like the 18th quarterback, you better have one of those guys, which everybody's going to have, but you better not wait too long, because a lot of smart owners who take an Aaron Rodgers early are going to get that insurance, and they're probably going to maybe take a Cam Newton or a Tyrod Taylor or Derek Carr, somebody who's, because keep in mind, you have to wait on that player. So your whole draft, that's what's risky about drafting quarterback late. Your whole draft is based on, man, I'm really big on Derek Carr this year. I'm really big on Blake Bortles. Well, if somebody else is smart, picks that guy up, now you're left with maybe a Joe Flacco, Carson Palmer as your starter. So you really need to be careful about that on draft day.
I'm really high on Joe Flacco this year. I think he's going to have a good year.
Would you say you're wacko for Flacco?
No, I don't think anybody would ever say that.
I just said it.
I bet you won't say it again.
Wacko.
Really don't.
Nah, I don't.
But Flacco, kind of an under the radar signing that they got was Jeremy Maclin, and I think Jeremy Maclin in that offense with Mike Wallace spreading the field, I think that Macklin's going to really help this team. They also brought in Danny Woodhead, so that's someone he can dump it off to. I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Flacco finishes top 15, top 12. I don't know if he'll get up to top 10, but I think he's going to have a good year as well. So let's go ahead and finish it out with our 21 through 25 rankings. And again, these are guys that are maybe a bye week fill-in. There may be someone that you want to get if you have a Tom Brady, a Drew Brees, just kind of some insurance, so that way you're not having to go too far down. But at 21, I've got Andy Dalton. 22, Carson Wentz. 23, Deshaun Watson. I'm assuming he's going to be the starter there. 24, Sam Bradford. And 25, Brian Hoyer, who's now in San Francisco. So Andy Dalton, actually, I think a lot of people would be shocked that he finished 12th last year in quarterbacks. Andy Dalton should probably be higher on this list, but since he's so he's the opposite of what you talk about with upside. You know exactly what you're getting with Andy Dalton, and I feel like that's why he falls in a lot of these rankings. But
on the Bengals, I told you the other day, I'm in on all Oakland players. I am off of all Cincinnati Bengals players. There's not one Cincinnati Bengals player that I'm huge on this year in terms of where they're positioned to be drafted. I just think the Bengals are going to have a really down year this year. And again, that's just me. That's just an opinion. So again, once you get to this level, once you get to this low of rankings, you got to look at upside, in my opinion. And the only guy on this list that I would even consider mentioning purely based on upside alone is Carson Wentz. That's the only guy on this list that I could see maybe even cracking that top 15. All these other guys, I don't see it, but Carson Wentz is a guy who I think could have that year where he, has a couple of big games. But again, like we talked about, it's all about insurance at this point. And in my opinion, Andy Dalton is a great backup quarterback this year. So that's my point. I'm not big on Andy Dalton, but just because you're not big on somebody doesn't mean he's not a great bye week fill-in. Because if something happens to your quarterback, you're going to want to have an Andy Dalton, a guy who's going to get you consistent 15 points, maybe 14 to 16 points a week. That's not that bad to have as a backup.
See, I think Deshaun Watson out of this 5, if I'm picking from this 5 and I've got a decent starting quarterback, Deshaun Watson's the guy I'm trying to get. I think he could have a Dak type year this year. He's on a good team.
Would you have to draft two? Would you have to draft another quarterback though? Because what if start of the season he's not started? He takes up a roster spot.
If he's not the starter but here's the thing. Say I draft Tom Brady, okay, and Deshaun Watson's my backup. Deshaun Watson's not listed as a starter. Okay, I don't need him right off the bat. I need him later on if maybe Tom Brady gets hurt. If Tom Brady gets hurt, then guess what? I'm probably screwed anyways and at quarterback. So I'm going to have to find something. I have to make a trade, do something to bring in a quarterback. But if you can give me Deshaun Watson, somebody who could end up having, he ran a lot in college. I just think the guy's a winner, man. I've been a big fan of his since he was at Clemson. And I think out of these group of 5 guys, we talk about upside, I think he's going to have a better year than Carson Wentz. The only reason I didn't put him higher on this list is because I don't know for sure if he's going to be the starter. I don't know if they're going to want to bring him along slowly. But he's got good wideouts, Hopkins and Fuller. He's got Lamar Miller running the ball. A good defense is going to keep him in a lot of games. So I think if he can be efficient with the ball, kind of like Dak was last year, I think he's going to have a big year.
And I just want to add this. If you take Tom Brady, try your hardest to get Jimmy Garoppolo as your backup. I think that any time that you get the top quarterback on a team and they have a backup who's proven themselves, that should be your number one priority for backup. I'd rather have Jimmy Garoppolo as my backup to Tom Brady than anybody we just mentioned, just because we've seen what he does when he gets in there. And if Tom Brady goes down, you have him to go up there. So again, this all changes. If you take Tom Brady, then you need to be moving Jimmy Garoppolo up on your list. You need to be making a note hey, I need to take this guy. I just think that's super valuable. And out of all the top 5 quarterbacks, he's the only backup, legit backup in the NFL who I would look at as drafting.
Yeah, see, I don't even know if I would draft him. I would definitely keep here's what I would do. I would draft Tom Brady, and then I don't know. if I would draft another quarterback, even in the entire draft, I'd wait to see how some of these camp things play out and then just build the rest of my roster. If I take a guy like Deshaun Watson who ends up not being the starter or whatever, then yeah, drop him, pick up Garoppolo, and now you have that insurance, and then just get a streaming quarterback whatever week, Tom's on a bye week. So,
which, by the way, isn't a bad strategy. I know a few people who've done the streaming quarterback from week to week. It's not bad. No. If you can't get one of your top, I'll put it this way. Say you're in a 12-team league. Say that you're the last team to draft a quarterback. So now you're drafting anywhere from 12 to 17. If you really don't feel huge on any of those guys, even though I think you're still going to get a great quarterback, you can stream quarterbacks. Like if you get a guy like like we talked about a Blake Bortles, maybe Joe Flacco has a great game coming up. I'm not saying you drop Bortles, but you can. There is some luxury of not having to start a Drew Brees every week. Not having to start a Russell Wilson every week.
Right.
There is some value there because you're never going to sit a Drew Brees. No matter the matchup, you'll never sit him.
And sometimes that'll hurt you too. If when Aaron Rodgers last year played against Dallas, I don't know what his. I know that they didn't play a good game, but like you said, you're never going to sit those top guys. When sometimes even the matchup is maybe better to just stream a quarterback in those situations. So don't be afraid to make some kind of bold moves. It's your team. We can give you all the rankings we want, but it comes down to who you like. You're going to have favoritism or not be so high on certain people for whatever reason. So we're, just kind of use ours as a barometer of like, okay, well, he's really low on this guy, so maybe I should kind of wait on him. But, once you get past the first 5 or 6 quarterbacks in this thing, they're all pretty close. I mean, it's not a huge difference between, I think at 7 had Russell Wilson, between Russell Wilson and say Matthew Stafford.
And don't be that guy, real quick, because I know we want to get into sleepers and busts. So I just want to make this point. Don't be the guy who freaks out when the first 6 go. Don't be that guy who takes 7. Right? Like get the best available player at that point. In my opinion, if you can't get one of the top 3 guys, in my opinion, then I would really think about waiting a little bit, just because you got to look at value in position. Like what value am I going to get? So don't be the guy who gets, it goes to you at 11. Rodgers, Brady, Breeze went in the top 10, and you're sitting there at 11 or 12, and you say, man, but like, I'm not saying it would be a bad pick to get Matt Ryan, but don't get him just because you feel like all the good quarterbacks are going to be gone. At that point, it's best just to get the best available player, in my opinion.
The only thing that I would think about taking a quarterback early is, and this is kind of like in our league, where Rodgers and Brady, they might not go in the first round, but they're going in that second round. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes back to me, say in the first round I have have the 8th pick. So I get someone like Mike Evans or someone like that, and then it comes back. Actually, I'd probably hopefully get a running back, because we'll get into the running back rankings at another time, but I feel like they're the most important position this year. But when it comes back, do I want Aaron Rodgers falling to a guy that also has Zeke Elliott or that also has Le'Veon Bell or David Johnson? I mean, that right there is going to be, just those 2 guys alone are going to be able. So depending on who goes in your draft, I wouldn't want Aaron Rodgers or Brady or Breeze really to fall to one of those guys.
No, and let's be honest. We all look at these mock drafts on ESPN, on Sports Illustrated, whatever. And again, I get that they always say like, oh, well, on ESPN's rankings, Aaron Rodgers is like 35th on rankings, right?
Never.
Let's be honest, man. Aaron Rodgers isn't going to get out of most people's drafts. He won't make it past the first round. Like, you got to be honest about that. So, like, I can't stand when I look at these rankings on ESPN and they have them, like, going in the third. Like, they do their mock drafts, name in the third round. There's no way that's going to happen. Now, if you're in a league where that happens, more power to you. But every league I've been involved in, every league that I've kind of seen, that I've heard about, that quarterback's going, and it's almost like a domino effect. So just be careful. It's like anytime that the first tight end state, anytime these positions go, these real valuable positions where you only need the one starter, people get a little freaky.
And this is the last thing I'll say before we get into sleepers and busts, but don't get caught in the fact that of saying, oh, I've got to take these running backs because there's only running backs are kind of like quarterbacks. Like after you get past the first handful, they're all pretty close. A lot of them are in timeshares. A lot of them are, third down backs, or, like Tevin Coleman, guys like that. I would much rather go ahead and take Aaron Rodgers than sit there and reach for a running back or a wide receiver, mainly a running back, because I feel like I have to. There's guys you can get later. You can get Frank Gore. You can get, Tevin Coleman in some leagues. So,
and just to add on to that real quick, you got to think of it that way. If those quarterbacks already taken, why are those running backs already taken and you're at like 9 and Rodgers is still on the board? Do I want the 9th best running back or the 3rd best receiver or whoever, or do I want the number 1 quarterback? So those are, again, I'm not telling you what to do. Those are things you have to have figured out though by draft day. You better go into your draft knowing what you want and build around that.
I'd say the first
things are going
to
change. Yeah.
I'd say the first 2 rounds you have to have a pretty good idea of what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. I think personally you have to take a running back in one of those first 2 rounds. Now that we'll get into that.
Yeah, that'll be another episode. But I guess what we're saying is like quarterback is very important, but at the same time, it's probably the safest position out of all the ones that we're going to talk about, where you can find value super late in the draft.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into our sleepers and busts for this year. So my sleepers, I picked 3 of each. I've got Blake Bortles, Matthew Stafford, and Eli Manning. I kind of touched on all those guys. Blake Bortles, to me, I know you said that you wouldn't be happy if he was your starter. If I had him as my starter, I probably wouldn't sit there and be like, oh, man, I just hit the jackpot. But he's a guy that's going to produce for you. You're going to look at the stat sheet at the end of the game, or you're going to look at how many points he got you, and you're going to be like, man, he got me another 18 points, and it didn't seem like he did anything. So, again, Eli Manning, I think he's going to have a bounce-back year. With the addition of Brandon Marshall, the running game is going to be improved. Matthew Stafford, he's going to throw it 45 times a game. So, that he's going to put up numbers. Now, how much of those numbers, correlate into points, who knows? But those are my 3 sleepers. Anybody that I missed?
Well, I got different sleepers.
Okay.
My sleepers, I've already mentioned it. Even though he's in my top 10, even though he's in a few people's top 10, I think that he could have a top 5 to 6 year, and that's Derek Carr.
We didn't even get his name right earlier, though.
But you didn't. I did. You said David. But I'm talking about the Derek Carr. The man, the myth, the legend of Derek Carr. I don't know why I'm so big on Derek Carr this year now that I'm thinking about it, but I'm big on him, and I'm sticking to it. I think Derek Carr is going to be, in all seriousness, I like Derek Carr this year. But big-time sleepers, I got 2 of them. I have Jameis Winston, and I have Cam Newton. And this is honestly just a gut instinct feeling. I've had Cam Newton when he was MVP. So, I mean, I'm a little biased towards Cam Newton. But I think Cam Newton, out of all the ones I just mentioned, I would really look at him a lot this year because he's going to have a running game. They got to coach and change. I don't think they're going to force him into doing as much physical running, but I think they're going to get creative and get him out of the pocket a lot more. And you'll start to see Cam Newton getting back into getting creative. He's got a huge arm. That's my number 1 sleeper.
I think Christian McCaffrey was a huge thing for them because the problem with him is he just takes too many hits.
Yeah. And the best part about him is out of the backfield catching the football.
That's what I'm saying. And now you got a guy that is he can dump it off quick too, where he didn't have that last year. You're not dumping it off to Jonathan Stewart.
But again, he's not in my top 3 sleepers, but I do like Eli Manning this year. Mm-hmm. I do like Eli.
And then in my busts, I've actually got 2 of your sleepers in there. Jameis Winston, Cam Newton.
Interesting.
And Ben Roethlisberger.
But real quick, before you get into that, this is what's awesome about fantasy football, right? We don't know what's going to happen. Mm-mm. I'm big on a few players, but like we've been talking about this whole time, the difference between the number 9 quarterback and the number 17 quarterback is not a lot. So don't read into these bust sleepers too much. These are just people that Chris thinks is going to be, hey, Jameis is saying that he's going to go people are saying he's going to go top 15. He doesn't think he's going to have a top 15 year.
Well, I saw him in fact, the publication I got, he was 9th. So
ESPN, he's on 12 as well.
Yeah, so I'm not saying Jameis Winston's going to have a terrible year. I just think that where you're going to have to draft him, he's not going to produce it where you're going to have to draft him.
And I'm with you on Big Ben, by the way. Right. I think Big Ben, I love Big Ben, by the way, because it seems like he puts it all out there. But that does concern me, man. That dude has taken so many hits and big hits and dealt with so many serious injuries. Not like, the Tom Brady injury or anything, but it's been consistent injuries over a career, and that concerns me a lot. heading into this year.
Right. So that's our quarterback rundown. We went over the top 25. I'm actually going to have a revised list once training camp kind of winds down and we kind of get some clarification on some things. And then we'll also be doing daily fantasy. Weekly, I'll be doing a show about daily fantasy pickups for FanDuel or DraftKings, helping you pick out your lineup and doing those and telling you the difference between, who's a good pick for a daily fantasy tournament and who maybe isn't a good pick for your, league fantasy team. So, thanks for joining us, Justin. You're part of a podcast, Stubville podcast. So if you'll get a chance to check him out, he does a lot of stuff on movies and pop culture. So, be sure to look at that when you get a chance. So again, thanks for joining us. We got a new website up, boardonthursday.com. So make sure you check that out and we'll see you next time.